Well, worship is intimacy with God. So, in a lot of ways, it is the result of my closeness with the Lord. So, a relative way to think about it is what I spend time doing with my wife on our time together, whether that's a date night or we're just hanging out, that's easily something I'm comfortable with when we're outside or when we're together around other people. It doesn't seem as awkward. And so worship is my intimacy with God. It's just my personal, really deep sense of closeness with Him, and that's expressed when I'm alone with Him and when I'm around other believers. So I just think that that's intimacy with the Lord. It's responding to who He is in a very deep, intimate way. So I see worship to be that complete, intimate response to who He is. Well, I definitely think of a time when my son had to be, we had to take him to the hospital 1 week. We didn't, he was just recently born, so he was like 2-3 months born. And if anybody's gone through that, you know that when the doctors don't know what it is, it causes a lot of fear and anxiety. So we went through a week of that, where he had to have like an immediate surgery, like on a Thursday, and they didn't know whether it was cancerous, they didn't know what it was. He was like 2-3 months old. My wife was overwhelmed, I was overwhelmed, and then he came out of surgery. You could just imagine. I remember my son being taken away from us, and both my wife and my daughter like crying because they were seeing him, and you know, just this tiny little new human that we had in our family, and they were wheeling him away on a little cart, and they were just like, they were in shambles, and I was trying to keep it together, you know, to hold them in that moment. And then he came out of it, and it was a Thursday, and that Sunday, I just remember releasing all of that weight in worship, just releasing all the heaviness of all that was as I sang that day. And so obviously there was a lot of emotion in it. I don't know how else you can bear the weight of life, you know, just the ordinary life, without having the opportunity to express that through worship and to let that go unto God. So in a lot of ways, the Psalms reveal that. The Psalms are a good snapshot of how emotionally chaotic life can be. You hear David struggling with fear and people trying to kill him and being accused of stuff, and he's asking God for vengeance, and he's asking, and then he returns and says, "But you are faithful, and you will not let me, you will not let my enemies defeat me." So I don't know how else you could deal with some of the weight that life gives without having worship. Worship in a lot of ways, and praise is a lot of ways therapeutic. It helps us process some deep emotional stuff and draw back to God. And when we do that, we are able to kind of go back with a clearer perspective of how to handle that. So for me, that one Sunday after, you know, my son went through that was such a relief. I just remember being restored and reminded of God's love in that moment and how it was going to be okay. And I just don't know how I could have processed that emotionally had I not had the opportunity to do that, or the opportunity to enter into worship. So for me, it's a critical part of processing brokenness and pain. Worship and praise are a critical piece of that. Jesus did it. A lot of people don't realize this, but Jesus sang. Matthew chapter 24, he sang before he went to the Garden of Gethsemane. He sat and sang a song with the disciples, and a lot of the historical and theologians believe that he would have sang Psalm 118 because that was Jewish tradition to go through the Psalms during Passover. And Psalm 18, we find the passage, "This is the day that the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it." So the idea of him knowing he was going to be crucified, and he had all this coming to him, and he could sit there and sing. Even Jesus himself processed what was going to happen to him through song and through praise and through worship. So to me, it's a gift that God gives us, an opportunity to catch a glimpse of His strength in the midst of those moments. So